Well, welcome to this video from Charles Darwin University and its Bioscience course. Today this topic is blood vessels and blood pressure. And we start with blood vessels. And we have two systems in our body, the arterial system and the venous system. The arterial system is commonly coloured red, and the venous system is commonly coloured blue. However, arterial blood is bright red in colour and venous blood is dull red. There's no such thing as blue blood. It appears to be blue in our skin, in the veins, because of the way in which light is reflected from the skin. Now, you don't have to remember the names of all of these vessels. We'll come to those that are important to remember later on in this video. Generally, arteries and veins travel together through the body. There are some variations to this, but that's generally true. And the two systems connect, of course, in the capillary beds throughout the body organs and tissues. There are three kinds of vessels: artery, vein and capillary. The artery has an outer layer called a tunica adventitia. Inside that is the tunica media, which is made up of smooth muscle and elastic tissue. And the inner layer is called the tunica intima. It's a single layer of cells on a basement membrane. And capillaries only have a single layer of what's called endothelial cells on a basement membrane. All vessels have a passageway through them called the lumen, through which blood flows. Now, the differences between arteries and veins: arteries transport blood away from the heart. They have a thicker tunica media. They have no valves. They have greater elasticity in their walls, and they have a smaller lumen. Whereas veins transport blood toward the heart. They have a thinner tunica media. They have valves. The walls have very little elasticity, and they have a larger lumen. The students often say that the difference between arteries and veins is that veins are further away from the heart. That's not correct. The difference is arteries transport blood away from the heart, veins transport blood to the heart. Looking at the blood vessels in more detail, we've got the tunica intima, which is the innermost layer, single layer of endothelial cells on a basement membrane. Tunica media, which is smooth muscle with elastic tissue, much thicker in the artery than in the vein. Then we've got tunica externa, or tunica adventitia is the other word for that, which is made up of connective tissue. Arteries have a smaller lumen, passageway through which blood flows, compared to veins. And you'll notice the valve there in the vein, which stops backflow of blood. In the capillary network, capillary is a very simple, a single layer of endothelial cells on a basement membrane. Now, this and the next slide are quite important. They describe the way in which blood flows through capillary beds. When blood comes into the capillary bed via an arteriole, and as it goes into the capillary bed, there are sphincters that control the flow of blood into the capillary bed. If those sphincters are closed, then blood does not go into the capillary bed. If they open, as in this case, they do. So you see there the precapillary sphincter and blood flowing throughout the capillary bed. However, if the sphincters are closed, then blood is not permitted to flow through the capillary bed, and it goes down the vascular shunt. Now, looking at blood flowing into the capillary bed, the concentration of water, amino acids, oxygen and glucose is higher at the beginning of the capillary bed, and so these compounds, molecules, diffuse into the surrounding tissues. But as you go to the end of the capillary bed, there's build-up of waste molecules, there's build-up of carbon dioxide, and you've got leftover water from metabolism, which is a higher concentration in the tissues surrounding the capillary bed, and you get flow of these into the last stage of the capillary bed. Now, these are the major arteries that you need to know. You've got the brachiocephalic artery coming out from the aortic arch, and that's supplying the right arm, and also the blood vessels to the neck, head and brain on the right side. And then in the aortic arch, you've got blood vessels supplying the left side of the neck, the head and the brain. The aorta then passes on its way down through the thoracic cavity into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity, down into the two major vessels that supply the leg, the iliac arteries. The major veins, the major ones returning blood to the heart are the superior vena cava from the head and neck, the inferior vena cava from the inferior part of the body. You've also got blood returning to the heart from the lungs. We now look at some unusual circulations. This is showing the circulation at the base of the brain, and the important thing to remember is this what's called the circle of Willis, or the cerebral arterial circle. So this is where a number of arteries are connected together in a circle to supply blood to the brain. The idea is to build in redundancy so that any one of those vessels fails, then blood can be supplied from an alternative source, because the brain has priority for arterial blood flow. You don't have to remember the names of all the parts of the brain or all the blood vessels. You just have to remember this, that this circulation exists. Fetal circulation is another one that's quite different. The placenta is where the fetus gets all of its oxygen and nutrients from the mother. The placenta is in the uterus, attached firmly to the uterine wall. You get blood flow through the umbilical cord, up through the umbilical vein, which then completely bypasses the liver and empties into the inferior vena cava, which then takes blood up to the right atrium, and most blood goes through what's called the foramen ovale, which is a hole through to the left atrium. Some blood also goes into the right ventricle and is then pumped out through the pulmonary artery, but you'll notice there's a shunt called the ductus arteriosus which takes blood from the pulmonary artery to the aorta. The importance of this is that the fetus doesn't require any nutrients in its own liver, and it doesn't require any oxygen in its own lungs. Both of these are basically non-functional. It gets both of those from mum. So the liver is bypassed and the lungs are bypassed, and the priority is to get blood into the aorta and pumped around the body, where of course there's great demands as the fetus is growing. So pointing there to the ductus arteriosus. Now, blood returns via the umbilical arteries back to the placenta, and the waste products, carbon dioxide, diffuse through the placenta into mother's circulation, and then she deals with them. Now, another interesting circulation is what's called the hepatic portal circulation. In this case, we've got capillary beds in the large and small intestines, in the stomach, and the spleen, partly from the pancreas, and venous blood flows from those capillary beds into what's called, so if that's showing the capillary bed in the intestines, then into what's called the hepatic portal vein, and then into capillary beds in the liver. And the liver gets priority on all of the nutrients coming from these sources. It extracts from the blood what it needs through those capillary beds, and then passes it on to the hepatic veins and to the inferior vena cava. We now go on to look at pulse. Pulse is the pressure wave that goes through blood vessels, and we can detect those at various places in our body. The two common places are the carotid artery in the neck and the radial artery in the wrist, near the wrist. And so these are the places where you'll be measuring your heart rate. We go on now to look at blood pressure. Now, blood pressure is the pressure of the wave that passes through particularly arteries. There's almost no blood pressure in veins, so we're concerned here about arteries. Arteries have a thick muscle wall, as you know, the tunica media, and has elastic tissue. So as that pulse passes through, it pushes the wall of the artery apart, and then the elastic nature of those, as the pulse passes, the vessel returns to normal size. But blood pressure is very important for us to remember that this is a diagnostic test used quite commonly when you go to the doctor. Now we have this instrument, sphygmomanometer, which is used to measure blood pressure using a cuff which gets inflated with air until, as you see in the diagram just below, that the cuff closes off. This is the brachial artery in the upper arm. When the doctor hears that sound, the sound of the pressure going through the artery, when it stops, that's systolic pressure. And then the pressure is steadily released from the cuff, and when no more sounds are heard coming through the brachial artery, that's diastolic pressure. So that's how blood pressure is measured. Now, blood pressure is affected by a wide range of factors. The stimuli, going back to the homeostatic pathways we studied in the first week, the stimuli are decreased blood volume, exercises, change in posture, various chemicals, and blood viscosity, which is the thickness of the blood. The way in which the body responds to these is shown in green through the sympathetic nervous system centres, the kidney, and then the way in which it responds is shown further below there: increased blood volume, increased heart rate, vasoconstriction, and so on. Let's look at these in a bit more detail. The kidney is primarily responsible in this respect for conserving water and salt. So it's actually preserving blood volume. Okay, and so you see increased stroke volume there. It's related to the volume of blood returning to the heart. The sympathetic nervous system, very important in controlling blood pressure, particularly through what's called vasoconstriction, which is where the blood vessels, you see the arteriole there, the diameter being reduced. But also has an effect on heart rate, and we'll go into this in more detail in a moment, and in stroke volume. Postural changes initiate vasoconstriction, so do chemicals, and increased blood viscosity. All of these have an influence on what's called increased peripheral resistance. It's the resistance of the peripheral circulation, the circulation away from the centre of the body, and the amount of resistance that it offers to the flow of blood. So all of those factors contribute to increased arterial blood pressure. Now, this is another system that's briefly mentioned in the previous slide, but very important in regulating blood pressure. And it's to do with when blood pressure falls, the kidneys release an enzyme called renin. And renin then splits a precursor protein called angiotensinogen. This is circulating in the bloodstream all the time, but it's converted into an active form by renin. So renin splits angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. But angiotensin 1 is still relatively inactive, and it's split into parts by what's called angiotensin converting enzyme, which is actually released from the lungs. Angiotensin 2 also causes the walls of small arteries to constrict, increasing blood pressure. And it also triggers the release of a hormone aldosterone from the adrenal glands and antidiuretic hormone from the pituitary gland. So this is quite a complex set of reactions, but the end result is, and this is the one that you need to know, that both of these things cause the kidneys to retain salt, and aldosterone also causes the kidneys to excrete potassium. The increased sodium causes water to be retained, so straight osmotic pressure we're talking about here, which increases blood volume and blood pressure. So this is just some facts about blood pressure. Normal blood pressure, it varies enormously. Hypotension, low blood pressure, not a big problem. However, hypertension is a problem. So these are the risk factors for high blood pressure or hypertension. Now, high blood pressure or hypertension is very prevalent in Western societies. In most cases, we don't know what causes it, but it appears to be a question of lifestyle. And once there are drugs that can be used to regulate blood pressure, but high blood pressure, but obviously you would seek to avoid it if possible. And these are the sort of lifestyle issues that need to be taken into account. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.